One of the Justice Department's most solemn responsibilities is ensuring access to the ballot box for every eligible citizen. And over the last 6 years, my colleagues and I have taken robust action to protect the voting rights of all Americans, including communities that have been too long overlooked and too often underserved. Before the Shelby County case was wrongly decided, we successfully challenged efforts in Texas and in Florida that would have disproportionately disenfranchised citizens of color in those states. And South Carolina had to make changes to its voting restrictions. Now, it should not be lost on us that almost as soon as the Supreme Court decision in Shelby County was handed down, the state of Texas implemented a photo ID law that the courts had previously blocked, and North Carolina implemented sweeping restrictions on voting rights. The Department of Justice has now been forced to challenge those discriminatory laws in court. Our work has taken us to other parts of the nation as well. We have worked to protect the voting rights of service members and to ensure accessible polling places throughout Indian country and Alaska Native communities. And we have fought back against discriminatory redistricting proposals that may make it more difficult for many Americans to make their voices heard. Despite these efforts, in some places, we've continued to see troubling new measures that unnecessarily restrict the ability of particular Americans to participate in the democratic process. Ohio, for example, has imposed new restrictions that significantly reduce opportunities for early voting, opportunities that had been in the past heavily used by African American voters. The early voting times targeted for cancellation, including weeknight and Sunday hours, previously provided critical opportunities for many people to get to the polls. In 2012, tens of thousands of Ohio voters cast their ballots during the voting days that Ohio has now eliminated. And studies suggest that these restrictions will disproportionately affect people with child care responsibilities, hourly salaries, and reduced access to transportation. People who may have difficulty getting to the polls at any other time, and who are much more likely to be low income or minority individuals. It is a major step backward to allow these reductions to early voting to go into effect. Those state officials who seek to impose these restrictions must justify clearly, factually, and empirically why they are necessary. Early voting is about much more than making it more convenient for people to exercise their civic responsibilities. It's about preserving access and openness for every eligible voter, not just those who can afford to miss work or who can afford to pay for childcare. That's why a number of states have expanded early voting in recent years. Throughout our nation's history, we have repeatedly seen that there is simply no good reason to reduce voting access. Indeed, the arc of our nation's history has, until recently, been to expand access to the ballot. Restricting voting hours in ways that would disproportionately impact minority communities is not only unnecessary and unwarranted, it is out of step with our history of continually expanding the franchise. It is contrary to our fundamental values of equality, opportunity, and inclusion. And it is an affront to millions who have marched and fought and too often died to make real America's most basic promise. 3 brave young men gave their lives in 1964, as did a courageous Detroit mother of 5 in 1965, so that others might be able to vote and be truly free. Are we now to turn our backs on those ultimate sacrifices? We at the Department of Justice will never rest in our efforts to ensure the right to vote, nor will I. And today, I'm calling on election officials and other public servants at every level across the country, men and women who are charged with upholding America's highest ideals, to consider their responsibilities not to political constituencies, but to the country we all serve. To think about the deep unfairness of curtailing voting opportunities, and to reflect on their place in the history of this country to which they are potentially consigning themselves. In a great nation governed both by and for the people, Our advances have always been of our own making. And going forward, it will be up to all of us to ensure that engagement in that democratic process remains the responsibility and the birthright of every American.